Welcome to the If You Build It, Will They Learn podcast, a show dedicated to modern learning and development. With your hosts, Daniel Mendonca and Scott Babcock.
It's podcast day. Welcome to the show. This is If You Build It, Will They Learn? I'm Scott Babcock, and with me as always is your co-host Daniel Mendonca. Daniel, how are you today?
Doing pretty good, Scott. The humidity in Canada has picked up. I know we talked about summer being here. It's now officially summer. That's good. But it's now gotten to the stage where if there is no breeze outside, you don't want to be outside.
Well, welcome to Nashville all the time. I'm glad you could join the party, the club, and really, swelter in the heat with us. That's what we're doing down here. It is a bit flipped in Nashville. I used to live in Minnesota where no one went out from like September to April when it was snowing and cold and whatever. In Nashville, nobody goes outside from May to August because it's just brutal. Welcome to the club. All right, on today's show, we are doing alphabet soup, learning alphabet soup, all the acronyms you know and might hear about in learning and development as you're going about your job, your role, participating with different partners. You're probably hearing the acronyms left and right. Welcome to corporate culture. We tried something new this week. Hopefully you saw it on our social media at Build It, Learn It. We put out a little pre-work. We did a little worksheet, a little glossary of all of the acronyms we're going to be talking about today. If you didn't, go ahead and hit pause right now. We'll wait. And go ahead and grab that off the interwebs and pull it up, and you can use it as a study guide if you need to. So our goal today is to take you on a bit of a journey. We want to set up an example company that is growing over time and kind of walk you through when those acronyms kind of come to play based on your organization. We want you to bear with us a little bit. We hope we're reaching a wide audience of people and users that are in different stages. So we may be starting a little too basic for where you are in your group, but hopefully over time you'll see yourself in one of these scenarios and you can kind of resonate. Just know we're going to walk through because we want to try to reach as many people and help them in their journey. And ultimately, that's our goal, is really to help you find ways to implement anything we're talking about and maybe provide you some insights.
Great, Scott. So before we start on the scenarios, let's talk about two things that we've brought up before that are really foundations regardless of where you're at in the learning journey. So the first one I want to cover is the ADDIE model of instructional design and just designing of content. So that would be, analyzing, designing, developing, implementing, and evaluating. Basically the process of building content. It's a continuous cycle. Every time you see the model, you're going to see it kind of in a circular motion because it is continuous and it goes around. So that's something, ADDIE as an acronym is something that you need to consider pretty much regardless of what point you are in your journey. And the second one, which is in a very recent episode, I think 2 weeks ago, is the VARK model. So VARK, basically your styles of learning that is focused on based upon your delivery method. So that is visual, auditory, reading or writing, and kinesthetic. So it's about providing variation in your content. And when you're putting out the content and you've used the ADDIE model to develop it, you want to consider what method is best for the content itself.
Awesome. I think that applies to everything you're doing out there. Just keep those in mind, but we will get started.
All right. Scenario one, and Scott has gifted us with some nice names for each of these scenarios again this week. Thank you for that, Scott.
I apologize. They are not Seuss rhyming this time. I did not have the creative juice flowing when setting these up.
We'll forgive you this week. Scenario one is starting out. So you're a company, it's generally small in size, maybe 100 employees. You don't have an L&D department. Your HR department is probably fairly small as well, and they maybe are kind of living in both times. You have minimal reporting requirements. You have a minimal continuous education plan. Tracking of the continuous education and development of your employees maybe isn't essential, but you're looking to start getting training out and make it more available and readily accessible to your employees. What do you do?
Well, I think as a organization, you really need to start kind of at the basics, right? And you're just trying to get information to your employees so they can be more productive in their job, more efficient. Maybe there is some information you just need to have available from like a governance or a standards perspective that is required of your organization. In this case, you're probably looking for something fairly simple and straightforward, right? You're probably looking at what we have in our acronym library defined as a CMS, a content management system. And this is just a place to start to put your information, put your content out there. It's generally going to be sort of a repository of information. This is just a place for people to go and access it. It's a library of information. Now, Daniel kind of mentioned in the scenario when we set it up, you're not as worried about tracking in those instances. And so you're probably not focused on the reporting part of it or gathering who took what in these cases. And in general, that means you're looking at formats or file sizes that are going to be more like documents or videos, in my opinion. You're probably not diving into the world of e-learning that can be really interactive or complex and often comes with more tracking capabilities.
Yeah, I think on that, like when you're describing a CMS, just some examples would be a well-defined SharePoint site. Things like that allow you to organize files, SOPs, videos about roles, demonstrations about things, but also just documents and, like you said, job aids or learning guides that could progress people in their role. But yeah, I think just giving an example would be a well-defined SharePoint site or some sort of, I'll call it lightweight employee intranet. And a lot of times your HRIS system that your company could be using would give you those options as well. So it's really just finding an organized place to put documents that are associated to learning and training of your employees.
When you're talking about the way you're going to reach those employees, I think probably in this scenario, you're really talking just about a good communication plan more than anything, right? You're not looking at a way to assign things or deliver things. It's just you tell people where it exists. You communicate frequently when it's something new is out or there's something they should go take a look at. But you're probably just looking at emails, or maybe you've got a monthly newsletter or something like that where you're going to just kind of talk through what's available and what might be like a good advice or a recommended or potentially required bit of reading. But yeah, it's usually pretty simple, right? I mean, that's the point. You don't have the manpower or the resources to apply to a really complex strategy or delivery options or management. You're just looking for a way to get it out into the marketplace for your learners.
All right, segment 1 was pretty simple and straightforward. You were starting out, but now it's time to move on up. So your company's growing in size, maybe up to 1,000 employees. You're starting an L&D department, small in scale, maybe a few individuals, one related to content, one related to platforms. Your leadership's starting to ask about tracking and auditing different departments, how they're progressing, what's the growth in their role looking like? Are they compliant in the things that you deem essential to do their job properly? And you want to start reviewing who takes what training, when they're taking it, how long they took it, and how well they did. So what do you do?
I think this is the fun part, right? When you get to actually start to explore a little bit in new ways of developing content or putting things out there. So you're probably ready at this point, I think, for an LMS. I think you've kind of stepped into a world where your learning management system needs are a bit more defined. But you're probably still going to look at a fairly simplistic LMS in this case, right? You probably don't need all the bells and whistles, at least in my opinion at this point. Now, maybe you're thinking about the future and you want to go that route. It's not going to hurt you. But a lot of times that comes with more administration that you just need to be aware of from a system standpoint. You've probably gotten big enough, too, at this point where you're going to get a more robust HRIS, your Human Resource Information System. And that's just a system that's going to allow you to pull in information and have more contact points, more attributes about your employees that really lets you personalize a bit of the experience. Perhaps you've got training that's only available in California. We hear that a lot. I think in any system we run is California has a unique set of rules, or New York often has a unique set of rules as well. Maybe you only need to assign certain content. That's really kind of where an HRS system is really going to play in that space.
I think one thing too, just make sure we understand, I think where we're at the point with the LMS versus HRIS is that a lot of HRIS systems come with the option of adding a learning component. So they have a learning component in the HRIS, but really it's just about kind of what we mentioned in starting out, hosting content there, allowing people to go take it. It's in different categories. You can see who took it, but it's not too in depth. And this is where you really want to understand your initial objectives at this point, because a lot of times that HRIS's learning component doesn't meet your needs, and just latching it on sometimes can sell yourself short, and you're going to end up being disappointed at the end. So I'd make sure you really understand your objectives, and that just like learning and development and human resources tend to be two different departments, your learning management system and your HRIS system tend to be two separate systems. And they speak together and they integrate, but they tend to live separately.
Yeah, I think that integration point is really the important connection there. And I'll give you a couple free acronyms that we didn't include in the pre-work just because Daniel brought them up and they make sense in this case because you may see them and it's good to kind of differentiate or distinguish between them. So we talk about an HRS that has a learning component. Oftentimes it's also compared with a talent management system, a TMS. When you group the HRIS, the talent management system, and the learning management system, that's usually called an HCM, a human capital management system. And so you may see those out as well. Don't get confused by those. That is generally an HCM is a suite of HR components typically, and it may include some or all parts of those. So just make sure it is meeting your needs. I think it's a good call out. Now with an LMS, there are two more acronyms that you might see in our sheet, and they're worth talking about. I think we've mentioned them in other shows as well as we talk about content. With an LMS, you're exploring the option to now do, again, trackable content. So you're getting into SCORM, which is a shareable content object reference model. I'm not going to say that again. You'll always hear it called SCORM. They come in different formats, 1.2, 2004. But essentially, they track who did what, when did they do it, how long did it take, did they pass, and did they get a score? Typically, there's 5 kind of key elements around the reporting that you'd be able to pull out of a SCORM object. And an AICC, which stands for Aviation Industry Computer-Based Training Committee, because it was started by a group of airplane design companies, Boeing and others. But you'll hear that called AICC. It is a similar format to SCORM. Now, the thing with AICC is it's a declining or often unsupported format now. I believe in 2000, I will probably get the year wrong, but I believe 2016, it was disbanded as a committee. But you will still see some legacy content that's out there, so systems haven't completely abandoned it from a delivery perspective, but it is far less common that you're going to see that, and I think over time you'll eventually see it disappear. So good to talk about those things as well, but these are going to give you your more interactive moments and really be able to track more touch points with your learners.
Yeah, and just a small tidbit on the AICC component, because I know that it's something that comes up a lot. If you have AICC content on any sort of platform that you currently use, it's probably time to update that content, because I know, for example, majority of times if you ask a learning management system provider, an LMS provider, they're probably going to tell you that they do not support AICC any longer. So just a small tidbit related to AICC that I thought it'd be valuable, so I thought I'd bring it up.
Yep, that's the stuff we talk about prioritizing a lot. That's the stuff I would focus on first, right? That's the things are going to become outdated quickly. One of our episodes talked about which content to start to think about transitioning. That applies to old e-learning as well as we did it more from an instructional design perspective, but same concepts apply.
One thing I want to add to this whole moving on up segment of the show is that when it comes down to the system that you're using, there are a lot of systems out there, maybe 5-digit number, I think, of actual LMS systems that you can choose from. But remember, the core part of choosing the system that's right for you is based upon how defined your objectives are, what you want to get out of the system. If you don't know that, there's flaws and differentiations and different feature sets in every platform. Some companies prioritize certain platforms because that's what they believe in from a philosophy perspective. Some have others that they don't believe in. So you'll see certain platforms missing one feature or another. But the reality is you need to make sure your objectives are clear, and it's kind of a good segue to the evolution of your company from an L&D perspective, because your goals and objectives change. Really, that's the reason why you evolve into new sets of platforms.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't say that when I was labeling this, I was really hoping Daniel would sing the Jeffersons theme song, and he missed out on the opportunity to really hit us with the lyrical melody of moving on up, moving on though.
All right, the next scenario, and I'm not sure there's a song associated to this one, Scott, so we'll go this way, but taking the show on the road.
I appreciate the enthusiasm.
What does that mean? So your company's established now, we've grown more and more, you've expanded. Maybe you're not just a company that's located in a single state, you got offices around the country, the continent, maybe the world. You have standardized operating models, you have more defined roles and progression within hierarchy and where employees can actually develop their talent and how they can progress. Your L&D department is now a major function of your organization. It's grown to include strategy. It includes design, development, and delivery personnel. So you have a full team associated to that all-encompassing L&D department. You have internal and external needs for reporting requirements. So to understand how your department is functioning and how successful they are, but also understanding compliance audits. And so your leadership and others can understand the general pulse of the organization. And lastly, you're trying to empower your employees to gain autonomy in their own development and their own careers. You're bringing in employees from other professions or other competitors, or they're coming right out of school and they want to understand how they're going to develop within your organization. Where do you go from here?
Things are picking up, right? That's the best part. You're growing, you're gaining some success, you're starting to think about things in a much more complex fashion, and your systems are going to need to kind of mirror that approach, I think, at this point. So now when we talk about a learning management system, I kind of mentioned maybe you were looking for more of the off-the-shelf, fairly straightforward, simple in your past example. You're now probably thinking more about complexity. Daniel mentioned that there's, I don't even know how many LMSs out there in the world, and they change pretty frequently. But you're in the thousands typically in terms of offerings. You're probably narrowing your options down quite a bit now because they're not all designed to do what you need them to do. One of the things that I think is going to be really critical at this point, because we talked about delivery personnel for your L&D department. We're talking about instructors. We're talking about trainers, facilitators, whatever you choose to call them. But these are folks that are going out and delivering your message. Now, that could be virtual. We've talked a ton about that in the world we live in today, where they can't physically get to the location as often. But in the past life, these are people that went out and set up classrooms and delivered your message to those offices that are located in remote locations. They're going to need ILT and VLT capabilities. That includes things like scheduling. It includes roster management, assessment systems, follow-up and pre-work and communications and notifications. And there's a whole suite of technology, I think, that go from a software perspective really helps support a strong ILT or VILT delivery system. And I think that is a differentiator to an LMS at this stage in the game. The content itself, the e-learning, the digital learning kind of components, documents, videos, those kind of things, those are pretty standard across most LMSs from a capability. ILT is not something you're going to find a really good, robust system for in every LMS.
Yeah, and on that note, I think when you talk about a more advanced LMS, we're going to bring up this acronym in the next scenario, but you start to creep forward into a platform that has a little bit more experiential of navigation. So journeys are involved, curriculums, self-paced, just learning paths and those sorts of things for development. But when it really comes down to it, you typically in the evaluation process of these systems, the one thing we see as a service provider a lot is there's usually a unique requirement or a unique set of requirements that comes with being this size of company. Either your leadership defines success in a certain way, and that's what's really going to narrow down what platforms you have the ability to choose from. So you'll start to find when you see those unique data points or unique things you need to report on, there will be a niche set of systems that provide you that service that you won't find everywhere. So procuring a platform is actually more difficult. And there are a lot of custom providers out there that will develop what you need specifically. That way it fits the exact mold of your organization. So, but yes, the UI UX is a huge component. I know we had a great episode on that, understanding, how a user logs in, how you get them to navigate, how you create personalized learning paths and journeys. That way it's a frictionless experience, but that's all a big part of creating that overall a learning ecosystem in your organization so there can be autonomy provided to the employees.
Yeah, that personal learning environment is really another step up in this section because you know more about your employees and they have that definition that Daniel defined in the example of there's hierarchy in their roles. They can see how they can move within the company. The system doesn't treat them as all one kind of delivery or whatever. They can say Daniel has a unique set of needs, requirements, or recommendations. Scott maybe has a completely different set because we're in different parts of the organization. And you get that personalized learning environment or PLE flavor, which is really designed around that UI UX too.
All right. And, Scott is a baseball fan, so it looks like he has a little baseball analogy here, but scenario 4 for you is getting called up to the majors.
My kids had an influence on this one for sure. And since I'm living the baseball life 7 days a week now, that's where I'm at.
Fantastic. So we're getting called up to the majors. Your company's not only an established business, but now is an established and growing L&D presence. It has a full learning culture. So learning is part of the culture of the organization. It's encouraged. And when employees join the organization, that's what's asked of them. It's user controlled. They tend to pursue their own development, pursue their own educational experiences. You really begin to bring on training partner organizations, different customers. You start to train your customers, other industry personnel, and you're constantly doing R&D within your organization to try to pioneer ways to implement different learning offerings or new types of learning. Scott, it's a place that I think every organization and every L&D department strives to be on the forefront of what's next and the best ways to train their employees. So how do they get started?
Yeah, this is probably a bit of the utopian environment for an organization where everyone would like to be. And you probably are in, if you've reached this stage, you maybe don't have all of the bases covered. We define it as a very broad catch-all environment, right? But maybe there's little elements here and there. Maybe you have the strong learning culture, but you're not ready for the R&D kind of pioneering moments. It's all right. We're all moving towards this, I think, is our goal. We'd love to be in a world where our employees are motivated and guided. So with that comes, I think you're moving from what is an LMS, which the important word there is the M, the management side of it. You're just trying to maintain, coordinate, and deliver a managed experience around your learning. You need to know what's happening. You need to be able to organize it in a way that's easy to navigate, but you're managing that system. You're archiving things, you're loading up new ones. We're moving into what we call a learning experience platform at this point. And these, you may hear it called an LEP or an LXP, but this is now about your learners having a differentiated experience in the platform beyond just managing. This often includes, things I can think of right off the top of my head. You're probably talking about social collaboration, user-generated content. So they're participating more actively. You're not just managing and curating content, but your employees are helping to contribute to that library of information. This often includes things like gamification, which is probably a whole episode for us in and of itself in what gamification itself is. But the idea that it is motivating to them on an intrinsic or extrinsic sometimes level where they're able to earn prizes or just points or participate in achievements and collection of badges or digital swag or something they can brag about or get credit for in their environment. But again, it's a broader experience that really they resonate with and attach to the idea. And again, this is where that learning culture comes in, where they're really bought into the idea that learning is important for their growth, for their success, for their proficiency in their jobs to be good at what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think you really hit the nail on the head in your original statement about the managed experience, right? Typically, when you take the personalized learning environment that we talked about in the LMS from the previous scenario, you're now taking another step forward where that environment is managed by the system itself and by the user. So as they complete content or complete curriculums, they're offered through adaptive learning styles or AI, artificial intelligence, or any sort of machine learning capabilities. They're offered new content. They're offered new curriculums that could help them progress through those roles we discussed from a hierarchical process. It is set up ahead of time, but then after that, it really allows the user to explore and experience the platform on their own in a way that they feel most comfortable, which is a huge proponent for that side of things. You're really going to start to hear different terms when it comes to LEP, LXP, things like LRS and a learning record storage, and XAPI, which is Experience API, which you go back to SCORM, which is kind of the next evolution of how content is developed, how it's formatted, how it's recorded, allows you to get a little bit more flexible with the modality you choose to develop training in.
When you're looking at those last two specifically, I think that those probably speak mostly to, and I don't want to say exclusively, but they're more around the pioneering, the R&D side of that, because I think they are growing. They're developing more and more. They're going to be related to the way you're tracking general movement in the system. LRS, the Learning Record Store, is really all around taking data from different places. So when we talk about this experience, I think you're moving past, again, you've tried to manage learning in an LMS in a lot of ways. You controlled a lot of what was happening, the content. And what's happening now is your employees are able to not only get information from your system, but they may be going out, whether it's college credits, industry seminars, online learning moments from maybe an industry provider. Maybe they're taking classes or a mentorship program through another area. An LRS allows you to bring data from all these other places into your system so that you can show that they're training because they're choosing to get content outside of that. That's part of what an LRS does for you, is bring that in. The other side of it is an LRS is just a database that's storing all of this data. And sometimes in our new content environments, we've talked about it very early on, episode maybe 2, I think it was, when we talked about virtual reality. Virtual reality itself has so many data points that are coming in. You need a really robust storage and collaboration system on the way you view that data. An LRS is part of that, and the XAP is what captures those movements in the content itself. But in the case of VR, in talking through with some of the LRS companies that are out there, VR can capture 500 data points a second in some cases that get passed on through XAPI limits to that LRS. Think about the amount of data that's there and sifting through that and getting any insight from it. You're going to start to need some additional elements to your LEP or LXP. So I think those are really cool. And the last side of this, from a user perspective, in my opinion, is, again, it's around kind of that gamification or making some motivational moments around your training. You're starting to get into maybe more of a virtual navigatable or guided path system for your employees. And then we're seeing a lot of that now, specifically in the age of COVID, where employees can't be physically on site, or maybe they can't be guided in person from a facilitator instructor. How do you find ways to let the system help guide them through their program, their platform, or their goals and objectives? And we call that a virtual learning environment, or a VLE, and they come in a wide variety of different formats and shapes right now.
One thing, as we kind of round up on these 4 different scenarios related to your L&D department and how you're approaching learning, something to keep in mind is that any success comes from understanding what you're good at and capable of, and understanding what you're not. At any one of these stages, at any given point in this process, there are probably things your organization is capable of, and there's probably things your organization is not. And we see partners of ours at Haylight who are really good at evaluating where they are and what they need. And then we see partners who are not really good at evaluating where they are, what they need. And they really are looking for guidance in terms of how to approach learning and what systems they should look to implement. The key thing here is understanding that, and it is a learning process, but also not overproducing learning. I know that Scott can attest to this as well. There is the opportunity when you're in this process to get ahead of yourself, to bring in systems and overproduce the technology or the content that you believe is valuable to your organization, and it can fall flat and end up being useless in a very blunt term to your learners and to your employees. That's not to say you shouldn't try new things, but it is to say that you need to really understand your objectives and where you're strong. For example, you may not have a strong content development team, so you need to outsource and work with a third party or an agency to develop e-learning for you because you don't feel comfortable managing an instructional designer, a content developer, and an analyst, and you want to outsource that. So understanding each level of the way, what you need and what you have internally, and what you can and who you can partner with, is an important part of each scenario. Because if you leave out that gap, you can be left a little bit disappointed with what you're implementing.
To add to that as well, and this is something I've seen from a number of clients that we work with, is beware of the buzzwords that are out there in the world right now. For some people, a buzzword isn't a buzzword. It's actual implementable technology or software because they're ready for it, to Daniel's point. But in other cases, it is still the cool, trendy term, right, that you get married to because your leader has heard it, or you saw it in a seminar and it sounded really awesome, or whatever. But if your system or your employees or your organization aren't ready for that leap into it, you can really it can become a stumbling point, to Daniel's point, that it ends up actually holding you back in some cases. I'll give you the prime example that I'm hearing constantly right now is, and Daniel mentioned them earlier, adaptive learning, machine learning, and AI. 3 huge words that everybody believes they should be attacking full force in their system right now. And while I love all of them, in the L&D space, in my opinion, they're all very similar in what they're going to do for your organization, but they require a pretty tremendous amount of data to make them possible. system technology to implement it, and then your learners need to understand why they're getting those experiences. So really spend the time to understand the technology or the trend and figure out where it fits into your organization. Does it even fit into your organization? And if you maybe don't have the resources, again, to the manpower or whatever, find the partner who can help you through consultation or actual delivery and implementation to help you step up to that. Because otherwise, again, you're gonna stumble a little bit, and then you may fall into that trap of it wasn't worth it or it was a failure when it wasn't the time.
Yeah, I think that just one more recommendation, just when you're analyzing each step of the process or analyzing any solution or guide, asking the question why, although very simple, allows you to have to explain yourself all the time. So like, I want to implement adaptive learning, and allow whoever you're in discussion with at that roundtable explain themselves. And typically you're able to, after they explain, okay, here's why I want to implement adaptive learning. I want people to personalize their own experience. Well, why do you want people to personalize their own experience? And that usually creates, and I mean, you could continue on for hours, but the point is everybody in the room then gets in on the objective and the philosophy. Asking the question why allows people to not have convinced themselves in their own head that they need something more complicated than it actually is. And you also may get people to realize during that process that we actually don't need this at all. You're 100% correct. I can't justify it to you why we need it. Maybe the answer is we just want to do it to see if it catches on, or to show that learning can be really cool or whatever. But understanding the why is a big part of success.
Come on, get happy.
All right, we end every show with a moment of positivity, something from the world that gives us a little energy, a little insight, a little excitement about what's going on in the world. For me, it is the neighborhood watch. And what I mean by that is, in our neighborhood, I live in Nashville, but we still live in a community that has wildlife all around us. We still get deer and rabbits, but we also have a fairly large population of wild turkeys that live in our neighborhood, probably 20 to 40 strong, depending on the time of year and any predation that may be happening in our neighborhood. But this is the time of the year where the neighborhood watch, which is what we call that group, they wander our streets, they are in and out of our yards, picking up the bugs in the grass and stuff like that. It's sort of a joke in our community, but this is where they get their new recruits. So every year we get to watch all the baby turkeys walking with mom all along the neighborhood. They're super cute. They bounce in and out of all the trees and all the bushes and stuff in the neighborhood. So it's a lot of fun. The whole neighborhood takes pictures. They celebrate the new recruits joining the neighborhood watch for us. It's a little silly. It's a little goofy, but I passed along a picture. Perhaps it will make its way to social media so we can share a picture of some of the new recruits that have wandered through the yard. But it's always fun just to watch some of the new stuff. We also have baby deer right now running through all of the neighborhood as well. And it's just a different experience to live in a city, but still be remote enough to have them wandering through your backyard every morning. So a lot of fun. The kids love it. The parents love it. Obviously, the neighborhood kind of has adopted them as just part of the community.
All right, my positivity point. I think I've definitely talked about this before, but something about this past weekend was a little bit different related to it. So I'm a major soccer fan. I think and a coach. We've talked about that. And soccer's been back on, professional soccer's been back on for about a month now. The German league isn't back, and I've indulged in that. But something about the Premier League in England being back hits a little bit different. So this weekend I indulged in a ton of games, and the quarantine had kind of happened. So my daughter hadn't had the opportunity to sit and watch a soccer game with me. But I'll tell you, there is a nice picture of me lounging on one side of the couch and my 4-month-old daughter lounging on the other side of the couch watching a soccer game this weekend. That was a big moment for me. She seemed very intrigued, probably just because there was bright colors on the TV. But I'm going to say it's because she liked soccer, and we're going to go from there. But yeah, no, it was nice to have soccer back this weekend. It was also my first Father's Day, so I got to watch some soccer on Father's Day. It was just another day, but it was the first Father's Day, so that was a nice experience for me as well.
Awesome. Well, that will do it for us today. Thanks again for listening. I'm Scott Babcock. He's Daniel Mendonca, and we will talk to you next week.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the If You Build It, Will They Learn podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Join the conversation by emailing us at podcast@haylight.com. Find us on social media at Build It, Learn It, and be sure to check us out on the web at www.haylight.com. That's HALIGHT.com.